The champagne glass trembled in my hand as I stood frozen in the hotel ballroom. Gold lights glittered overhead, reflecting off crystal chandeliers that cost more than my annual salary. Camera flashes burst like lightning across the crowd of designers, clients, and industry executives. Everyone was watching the stage where my fiancé stood with his arm wrapped around our CEO's daughter. Aaron Miles looked perfectly confident in his tailored navy suit as he leaned into the microphone. His voice echoed through the speakers with practiced smoothness. "I'm thrilled to announce my engagement to Vivian Castellano." The words hit me like ice water. My engagement ring, the simple silver band he'd given me 3 months ago, suddenly felt heavy on my finger. Vivian stood beside him in a cream dress that probably cost more than my car, diamonds glinting at her throat. She turned toward the audience with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, then spoke loud enough for the nearest reporters to hear. "Some people just don't know when they're beneath their station." Laughter rippled through the crowd. My throat burned, but I refused to let them see me break. "My name is Tessa Markham. I'm 31 years old, and until tonight, I was the senior designer at Castellano Interiors, DAF, one of Chicago's most prestigious design firms. I'd spent 7 years clawing my way up from an unpaid internship to leading projects worth millions. I came from nothing, literally nothing. My mother cleaned office buildings at night while I studied design textbooks from the library. I worked 3 jobs to afford community college before transferring to a state school. When I finally landed the internship at Castellano, I slept on my friend's couch for 6 months because I couldn't afford rent and professional clothes at the same time. Every success I'd earned came from talent, hard work, and refusing to quit when doors slammed in my face. But tonight, standing in this glittering ballroom, I realized something devastating. The man I'd trusted with my heart had used me as a stepping stone. Aaron had climbed on my back to reach Vivian's level. And now, I was the office cautionary tale, the gutter girl who'd reached too high. I remembered the day Vivian joined the firm 18 months ago. She'd walked into the office like she owned it, which technically her father did. Perfect blonde hair, designer everything, confidence that came from never worrying about rent or grocery money. Our boss had assigned me to mentor her, show her the ropes of commercial interior design. I'd been generous with my knowledge, because I genuinely wanted to help. Vivian had seemed grateful at first, taking careful notes during our meetings, asking thoughtful questions about client relations and design principles. But I'd noticed small things that should have warned me. The way Aaron's eyes followed her across the office. How he'd volunteered to help with her first solo project, even though he was in project management, not design. The subtle shift in how he spoke to me, less like a partner, more like a colleague he was outgrowing. I'd ignored the warning signs because I wanted to believe in us. That was my first mistake. The breaking point came during the Riverside Tower presentation 6 months ago. I'd spent 3 weeks developing a complete design concept for a luxury residential building, everything from lobby aesthetics to individual unit layouts. The night before the pitch, I'd shared my final materials with Vivian because she'd asked to learn my process. The next morning, she'd walked into the conference room with my designs printed on glossy boards under her name. Every detail I'd created was there. The color schemes, the furniture, selections, even the specific lighting fixtures I'd sourced from a small manufacturer in Portland. Aaron had stood beside her during the entire presentation, nodding along as she explained concepts that came from my brain. When the client asked about certain design choices, Vivian had stumbled over answers until Aaron smoothly redirected the conversation. I'd sat at the conference table with my hands folded in my lap, nails digging into my palms until I felt blood, but my face stayed perfectly calm. Professional? Unreadable. 2 weeks after the Riverside presentation, an email thread leaked to the entire office. According to the messages, I'd supposedly lost control during a client meeting, shouting at a contractor and threatening to quit if my suggestions weren't followed. The emails looked authentic, my name, my email signature, even writing that sounded like mine. But I'd never sent those messages. Someone had fabricated them. HR called me into a meeting with 3 executives present. They asked if I was under stress, if I needed time off, if I understood the importance of professional conduct. I'd known immediately that defending myself would make things worse, so I'd apologized. I'd stood in front of the entire design department during our weekly meeting and said I was sorry for my unprofessional behavior. My voice had been steady, my posture straight. But inside, I was calculating, remembering faces, noting who looked surprised and who looked satisfied. Vivian had caught my eye across the room and smiled, a small, private smile that told me everything I needed to know. Aaron had proposed in the office stairwell on a Tuesday afternoon. There was no restaurant, no romantic setup, just him pulling a velvet pouch from his jacket pocket between meetings. The ring was simple silver, pretty but inexpensive. He'd said he wanted something meaningful rather than flashy, that he knew I'd appreciate substance over show. I'd said yes because part of me desperately wanted to believe I'd finally won something. That despite coming from nothing, despite the whispers about my background, I earned a place in this world. But even then, something had felt off. The proposal was rushed, almost transactional. He'd kissed me quickly and then checked his phone, muttering about a meeting with Vivian's father. I'd stood alone in that concrete stairwell afterward, looking at the ring on my finger and wondering why I felt more anxious than excited. Now I understood. The engagement was never real. It was just another tool in Aaron's climb toward power. The rumors started small. Vivian's family was buying a larger stake in the firm. Aaron had been promoted to senior project manager. My desk was moved closer to the window, supposedly a good thing, but it felt like being pushed to the edges. During our monthly staff meeting, my boss announced that I'd be the creative lead on the firm's biggest project of the year, a complete redesign of the historic Palmer Building downtown. I'd felt a rush of validation until he added the second part. Vivian would be the public spokesperson, the face of the project for all media and client interactions. My designs, her voice. My concepts, her credit. When I tried to object, Aaron had squeezed my hand under the conference table, a warning disguised as comfort. After the meeting, he'd pulled me aside and explained that this was politics, that I needed to be a team player, that my turn for recognition would come. I'd nodded and smiled, but I was already planning, already documenting, already preparing for war. I'd found the proof on a Thursday evening. Vivian had left her laptop open in the conference room, and I'd noticed my design files displayed on the screen. Not similar files, my exact files, with timestamps showing she'd accessed my cloud storage using admin credentials. Every sketch, every mood board, every carefully crafted presentation I'd built over months. She'd copied everything and rebranded it under the Castellano Interiors label, with her name as primary designer. When I'd confronted her the next morning in her office, she'd barely looked up from her phone. Her response was delivered with perfect casual cruelty. "You should take it as flattery, Tessa. You're inspirational." I'd turned to Aaron, who'd witnessed the entire exchange. He'd shrugged and suggested we all wanted the company to succeed, didn't we? That's when I'd walked out before I said something I couldn't take back, before I let them see exactly how much I understood, because I'd realized something important. They thought I was beaten. That made me dangerous. The night of the spring gala arrived with perfect weather. The hotel ballroom was transformed into a garden paradise with hanging florals and soft lighting, ironically, based on concepts I'd developed for another project. My name was printed on every invitation as Aaron Miles's fiancé, positioned right beside the Castellano family names. I'd spent an hour getting ready, fixing my dark hair into an elegant twist, choosing a simple black dress that made me feel powerful rather than pretty. I'd stared at myself in the mirror and made a decision. I would walk into that ballroom with my head high. I would smile at the people who'd whispered about my background. I would reclaim my dignity, even if I couldn't reclaim my work. But then Aaron had taken the stage beside Vivian. The announcement had shattered everything, and as the cameras flashed and the crowd whispered, I'd understood that this wasn't just betrayal. This was erasure. They wanted me gone. After the announcement, I'd escaped to the restroom while everyone else celebrated. The marble bathroom was empty, except for my reflection staring back from gilt-edged mirrors. I could hear voices in the hallway outside, colleagues from the office discussing the engagement with theatrical surprise. "Did you know Aaron was seeing the boss's daughter?" one woman asked. Another responded with cruel certainty. Of course, Tessa was just a placeholder. You can take the girl out of the gutter, but you know the rest. There was laughter, agreement, the sound of heels clicking away down the corridor. I'd gripped the marble counter until my knuckles went white, breathing slowly through the rage that threatened to consume me. Then I'd looked at my reflection and made a promise. If they wanted to call me gutter girl, fine. I'd become the goddess of it. I'd show them what someone with nothing to lose could accomplish. And they'd never see me coming. I quit the following Monday. No dramatic speech, no tearful goodbye email, no confrontation in the boss's office. I simply typed a 2-sentence resignation letter stating I was pursuing other opportunities, submitted it through the HR portal, and began packing my desk. My colleagues had watched nervously as I'd loaded my personal items into a cardboard box. Photos, my favorite coffee mug, the small succulent plant that had survived 3 years on my windowsill. Vivian had stopped by with fake sympathy dripping from her voice. I hope there are no hard feelings, Tessa. Business is just business. I'd smiled and handed her a stack of client folders. These are for you. All the active projects I was managing. Everything you need is inside. She'd taken them eagerly, probably thinking I was surrendering. She'd had no idea those folders were carefully incomplete, with crucial data removed and saved on my personal drives. I'd left the building for the last time, carrying my box and my plans for revenge. I'd started consulting from my apartment that same week. Small projects at first. Residential designs for private clients I'd built relationships with over the years. People who'd specifically requested my work, who'd valued my aesthetic regardless of what firm name appeared on the contract. Word spread quickly through industry networks. The designer who'd left Castellano was available for hire, offering rates below the big firms, but with the same quality that had built their reputation. Within 2 months, I had steady income and a growing portfolio. Then I'd received an interesting inquiry. Maxwell Burke, CEO of a rival design firm called Apex Interiors, wanted to discuss a potential collaboration. Burke's company had been competing with Castellano for years, and he'd made no secret of his dislike for Vivian's father. When we'd met for coffee, he'd studied me with sharp blue eyes and asked direct questions about my departure. I'd been honest without being vindictive. He'd smiled and offered me contract work. I'd accepted, knowing this connection would matter later. I'd created a new professional identity carefully. Artemis Designs emerged online with a sleek website showcasing anonymous work. Designs attributed only to the studio name, not to me personally. I'd entered competitions under this alias, submitted concepts to industry publications, built a reputation separate from my history with Castellano. Within 4 months, Artemis Designs had won 3 regional awards and been featured in 2 national design magazines. The work was praised for its authenticity and innovation, for breaking away from the corporate sameness that dominated commercial design. Critics noted how Artemis Designs seemed to understand spaces on an emotional level, creating environments that felt personal rather than manufactured. No one connected the work to me. Why would they? I was just the gutter girl who'd crashed and burned at a prestigious firm. Meanwhile, my designs were being celebrated by the same people who'd dismissed me. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't satisfied yet. This was just the foundation. Castellano Interiors launched the Palmer Building project in September with massive publicity. Vivian had been everywhere. Magazine interviews, podcast appearances, social media campaigns showcasing her as the brilliant mind behind the revolutionary design concept. Except the concept wasn't revolutionary anymore. It was failing. Contractors kept hitting problems with the structural modifications I'd specified, except the specifications in Vivian's files were incomplete. The custom materials I'd sourced weren't available because I'd had exclusive agreements with suppliers who loyally refused to work with Castellano after learning how they'd treated me. Client meetings became disasters as Vivian struggled to answer technical questions about designs she didn't actually understand. By October, 3 major investors had withdrawn from the project. The Palmer Building was collapsing, and so was Vivian's reputation. Aaron, as project manager, took most of the public blame. His name appeared in trade publications as the administrator who'd failed to properly vet the design before committing to construction. I'd watched it unfold with quiet satisfaction. Maxwell Burke had called me in November with an offer I'd been waiting for. Apex Interiors wanted to bring Artemis Designs in-house to reveal the talent behind the anonymous work and make me their lead creative director. The salary was triple what Castellano had paid me. The contract included creative control, profit sharing, and most importantly, public credit for all my designs. I'd sat in Burke's corner office overlooking Lake Michigan while he explained his vision for the company's future. "You've got something the corporate firms lost years ago," he'd said, leaning back in his leather chair. "Authenticity. Soul. Designs that make people feel something instead of just checking boxes for investors." I'd accepted his offer without hesitation, but I'd made one request. I wanted to stay quiet about the Artemis connection for another month. Burke had raised an eyebrow, but agreed. He was smart enough to know I was planning something, smart enough to trust I'd deliver results worth the wait. I'd made my public return in December. Design Weekly, the industry's most influential magazine, published a feature story revealing that Artemis Designs was actually Tessa Markham, the designer who'd left Castellano earlier that year. The article showcased my work with full credit, included interviews with satisfied clients, and positioned me as an emerging force in Chicago's design scene. The response was immediate. Social media exploded with discussions about my designs. Other designers reached out offering collaboration. Clients who'd never responded to my inquiries at Castellano suddenly wanted meetings. And Castellano's PR team went into panic mode. Vivian's father issued a statement calling my work derivative and suggesting I'd built my success by copying techniques learned at his firm. The accusation was laughable to anyone who'd actually compared the work. My designs had depth and innovation that Castellano's recent projects lacked. The internet knew it. Industry professionals knew it. Only pride prevented Vivian's father from admitting it. The emails leaked in January. Someone I'd never confirmed who had forwarded internal Castellano communications to a design industry blog. The messages showed Aaron explicitly instructing staff to transfer my design files to Vivian's credentials, to rebrand my concepts under the Castellano label, to ensure I received no external credit for projects I'd led. There were messages between Aaron and Vivian discussing how to manage me, how to keep me focused on work, while they positioned themselves for advancement. One email from Aaron to Vivian's father made my blood run cold. "Tessa's talented, but she lacks the background for public representation. She's useful for concept development, but not for client-facing roles." The internet responded with fury. Designers shared their own stories of being exploited by corporate firms. Clients questioned the authenticity of Castellano's recent work. Trade publications ran articles examining whether the company had systematically stolen from its employees. Aaron deleted all his social media accounts within 48 hours. Vivian's Instagram, once filled with glamorous photos, went silent. Aaron had called me late on a Thursday night. I'd been working on designs for a new boutique hotel when my phone lit up with his number, a number I hadn't deleted because I'd known this call would eventually come. I'd let it ring 3 times before answering. His voice had been strained, accusatory. "You did this, didn't you? The leaked emails, the media attention, you're destroying everything we built." I'd felt remarkably calm. The anger that had consumed me months ago had transformed into something colder. "We didn't build anything, Aaron. I built designs. You stole credit. There's a difference." He tried to justify, to explain how the industry worked, how relationships and connections mattered as much as talent, how he had to make strategic choices. I'd cut him off. "No, Aaron, you made selfish choices. You chose advancement over integrity. And now you're facing the consequences." I'd ended the call without waiting for his response. There was nothing left to say. The Castellano board launched an internal investigation in February. Shareholders were demanding answers about the Palmer building failure, the leaked emails, and the company's declining reputation. Vivian's father tried to deflect, but the board hired an independent auditor to review project records. What they found was damning. Almost every successful project from the past 2 years could be traced back to concepts I'd developed. Vivian had her name on the files, but the metadata, revision histories, and design evolution clearly showed my work. She'd contributed virtually nothing original. The board forced Vivian's father to step down in March. The official statement cited health reasons and a desire to spend more time with family. I'd watched the press conference from my new office at Apex, sipping wine from a crystal glass Burke had given me as a welcome gift. Health reasons. I'd raised my glass to the screen and smiled. The call came in April from an unexpected source. A European investment group called Sterling Ventures wanted to fund a major commercial project in Chicago, a mixed-use development combining residential, retail, and office space worth over $200 million. They'd been impressed by Artemis Designs and wanted Apex Interiors to lead the project. But there was a catch. Sterling's managing director believed in redemption stories and second chances. He wanted the project to include a partnership with a legacy Chicago firm to demonstrate collaboration over competition. He'd specifically suggested Castellano Interiors. Maxwell Burke had looked at me across the conference table where Sterling's representatives had made their pitch. "Your call," he'd said simply. I'd thought about it for exactly 10 seconds. Then I'd smiled. "Let's invite them to the table. See if they're interested." Burke had grinned. He'd known exactly what I was planning. Vivian would have to beg for the chance to work with the woman she'd tried to destroy. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Apex's downtown office. I'd arrived early, reviewing the project details one final time. The Sterling contract was legitimate, a genuine opportunity worth millions. But the terms I'd negotiated gave me complete creative control, final approval on all design decisions, and public credit as lead designer. Any partner firm would be working under my direction. At precisely 10 o'clock, Vivian entered the conference room. She dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back severely. She looked smaller somehow, less confident than the woman who'd stood on stage beside Aaron months ago. She'd shaken hands with the Sterling representatives first, then turned to me. Her smile had faltered. "You look different," she'd said. I'd met her eyes calmly. "No, you're just seeing me clearly for once." We'd sat across from each other at the polished conference table, and I'd explained the project parameters. Vivian had listened with growing comprehension that this wasn't a partnership. It was a rescue operation for Castellano's dying reputation. The contract terms were brutal but legal. Castellano would provide support services, project management, contractor coordination, basic drafting, while I maintained complete creative authority. All designs would be credited to Artemis Designs and Apex Interiors, with Castellano listed as a consulting partner. Vivian would be required to work directly under my supervision, implementing my vision exactly as specified. There would be no room for independent changes or creative interpretation. I'd watched her face as she'd read through the contract pages. Pride warred with desperation. Her father's company was hemorrhaging clients and talent. This project could stabilize them financially, but at the cost of public acknowledgement that they needed me. Sterling's representative had made it clear: accept these terms or they'd find another legacy partner. After 20 minutes of tense silence, Vivian had signed. Her hand had shaken slightly as she'd added her signature. I'd left the building before the press arrived to photograph the signing. Let Vivian explain to reporters why she was working for the woman she'd called beneath her station. I'd designed the Sterling project to fail for Castellano. Not the project itself. That would have been unethical and hurt innocent people. But I'd structured every aspect to highlight the differences between Apex's innovation and Castellano's corporate limitation. Where my designs pushed boundaries, their implementations were conservative and safe. Where I specified custom solutions, they suggested standard alternatives to save money. Client meetings revealed the gap clearly. Sterling's team responded enthusiastically to my presentations and politely to Vivian's attempts to contribute. By August, it was obvious to everyone involved that Castellano was dead weight. When the Sterling Group finally made the decision to remove Castellano from the project and work exclusively with Apex, I'd been prepared. The contract I'd written included performance benchmarks Castellano had consistently failed to meet. The termination was clean, legal, and publicly justified. Media coverage focused on Castellano's inability to execute modern design vision. Vivian's attempt to rebuild her reputation had instead confirmed her limitations. Meanwhile, Apex Interiors tripled in size, hiring away half of Castellano's remaining talent. The Design Excellence Awards ceremony took place the following spring in the same hotel ballroom where Aaron had announced his engagement to Vivian. I'd stood backstage in a red dress that cost more than my first car, listening to the presenter announce the Designer of the Year category. When they'd called my name, the applause had been genuine and sustained. I'd walked across the stage where I'd once stood humiliated, accepting the crystal trophy and approaching the microphone. The lights were bright, the crowd attentive. I'd seen faces from Castellano in the audience, colleagues who'd watched me pack my desk, clients who'd doubted my abilities. I'd kept my speech brief and pointed. A year ago, people told me I didn't belong above the gutter, that I'd reached beyond my station. I'd paused, letting the words settle. Turns out that's where diamonds are formed, under pressure, in the dark, where everyone assumes nothing valuable exists. Thank you for teaching me that lesson. The standing ovation had lasted 90 seconds. I walked alone down a quiet Chicago street afterward, heels clicking against the pavement, city lights reflecting in the puddles left by afternoon rain. The award was heavy in my bag, but I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone had been buzzing with congratulations messages, interview requests, and project proposals. Apex was opening a New York office with me as creative director for both locations. Sterling Ventures had already contacted us about 3 more developments. And somewhere in this city, Aaron was working a mid-level position at a firm that didn't know his history, while Vivian struggled to rebuild a reputation that might never recover. I'd won, but the victory wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about proving something I'd always known, but others had refused to see. Talent doesn't care about pedigree. Creativity doesn't require the right last name. And the people who start with nothing often have the clearest vision, because they've spent their whole lives seeing past surfaces to find what's real underneath. They'd called me gutter girl, and maybe they'd been right. The gutter sees everything the glass towers hide, and it always remembers where the cracks start.